This is the Devil's Guide to D&D. Devil's Delegate here, and once again, a new release has changed my recording plans. But this time that release is from Wizards of the Coast, and it's the new Unearthed Arcana Heroes of Krynn. And that means Dragonlance. So this means we're going to be getting a Dragonlance campaign setting for D&D 5e somewhere within the year. The Unearthed Arcana sets up what we're going to be getting, but of course there may be changes before then. Since there is so much in this Unearthed Arcana, I'm going to do it in two pieces. I'm going to take a look first at the new race, it's the Kender, and the new subclass for Sorcerers, and it's really interesting. And then I'll save for the next video the feats and backgrounds. And all of these really are changing how I'm thinking Wizards are going to be doing things in the future. I thought a lot of what was going to happen, particularly in the new books, was pretty much laid out. That the Sorcerer class was going to be revamped in a specific way, that backgrounds were going to act in a particular way, that feats were. And now they've changed that all up. In fact, some of this is rescuing Strixhaven a bit, because some of those items in Strixhaven, which were only good within the campaign setting of Strixhaven, can now be used outside of it as we have more things on the same level. Okay, but for this video, let's dig into what we've got, and what we've got to start with are the Kender. Yes, I know it's Kender, but come on, German, it's Kender. We know where the word came from. Really, it would probably have been better if it had been Kinder. But alright, the Kender. This is a race which has annoyed a whole lot of people over time. You may be looking forward to this, or dreading their coming, but they're here. They're the Halfling's obnoxious cousin. Ones that in the past had a problem with kleptomania. Our new version? Well, it's a lot like a Halfling, with the kleptomania made a little bit less steely. To go with the other changes we've been seeing in races, thematically, anything taught, cultural, or learned has been removed from races to be replaced by supernatural or magical foundations. So things that in the past with Kender have had to do with just how they behave now has a magical underpinning. But let's start with the less magical, which is they're humanoid, they're small, and they have a walking speed of 30, which is going to be the norm from now on. Expect the Halfling speed to change to 30 once we get a new version of Player's Handbook. And they get brave, having advantage on saving throws against being frightened. Again, this is like the Halfling. They then get Kender Ace, which is the replacement for kleptomania. Now, starting at 3rd level, they can just put their hands in any bag or container, or usually their pocket, as a bonus action, and pull out something. What that something will be determined by a random die roll. It could be some gold pieces, it could be a simple weapon, it could be some adventuring gear, a trinket, a crowbar or a grappling hook, or a tool. I like this. This can be a lot of fun. Again, we're going with the flavorful. Now, as far as mechanically goes, yeah, this is not good. All the items that the Kender can pull from its pocket are things that the party probably already has. This is casual shopping trip stuff. These things are nothing out of the ordinary, nothing special. Now, it's still pretty good to pull something that's normal every day out of your pocket, because you never know what you might need. The problem here is that you can't choose. And it's very unlikely that you're ever going to run into a situation where any one of these things would do. If you need a grappling hook, then chances are you really need a grappling hook, and a trinket or a couple gold pieces are not going to do. Now you get to do this proficiency number of times per day, which does give us sort of the amusing situation of someone saying, what we really need is a crowbar here, and the Kender reaching into its pocket going, well, I've got a trinket. Well, next try, I've got some thieves' picks. No, so all kind of fun. But the chance of getting what you want is 1 in 6. So until you get to high levels, figure you're never rocking better than 50% chance. And that's kind of sad, because you're just never going to need any of these things all that often. I think probably they should have just made these funnier. Still, I've got nothing against this if we have something else that's better, and we've got something else that's better. That something better is taunt. This one lets the Kender insult someone enough to make them feel sad. If they fail their save, they have disadvantage on attack rolls until the start of your next turn. The Kender can do this proficiency bonus times before a long rest. This is very good. Very bardic. In fact, a little bit of my problem with this is that it's very bardic. Kind of like a Vicious Mockery properly scaled, but then in my games I have Vicious Mockery properly scaled, so... In any case, this is a nice ability, giving disadvantage to your enemies multiple times per day. One oddity with this design is that for this feature, it uses the Kender's Charisma. They just spent a lot of effort taking the specific ability scores out of the player character races in Monsters of the Multiverse. The new way is to let you choose if you want to use Intelligence, Wisdom, or Charisma. I'd be very surprised if this wasn't changed when it was published in the Dragonlance campaign book. Overall, the Kender comes out to be a pretty good race. Not an outstanding one, and not one I jump on for any specific class. I have no immediate build ideas that would require the Kender, but there's also absolutely nothing wrong with this race for any build idea that you have. So a reasonable addition, and unlike the lore and background of the Kender, nothing offensive here. And now the main event, the new Sorcerer subclass, Lunar Magic. Now, since the Sorcerer's powers are divided into 3 groups based on things dealing with the moons, I would have thought this would have been about the 3 moons that influence the mages and the Knights Orders, but that's not the case. Instead, we're dealing with moon phases. Interesting, but once again, lore doesn't matter much to me. I make my own. They do give us a table on how Lunar Magic manifests in you, if you want to have a table for that. I'm going straight on to the first feature, and that is Moonfire. You get this at first level, and it gives you the Sacred Flame cantrip, which is a pretty decent cantrip. But here's the big twist. When you cast the spell, you can target 1 creature as normal, or target 2 creatures within range that are within 5 feet of each other. This is a significant improvement for this cantrip. Spending your action firing off cantrips usually doesn't feel good, because damage just isn't good enough. But with the damage potentially doubled, this cantrip becomes much more competitive. So a nice start, but it all comes down to the second feature that comes on at first level, and that's Lunar Embodiment, and that's our spells. So once again, like the Clockwork Soul and Aberrant Mind, the Lunar Magic Sorcerer is getting spells. However, besides that statement, things aren't so clear. I'd figured after Clockwork and Aberrant that things were pretty much set on how a sorcerer was going to behave in the future, that it would get 10 spells and that it could trade those in and out. But that's not what we're getting here. Instead, we're getting 15 spells, 3 at each level. And just as with Aberrant and Clockwork, these count as sorcerer spells for you, but they don't count against the number of sorcerer spells you know. So the Lunar Magic Sorcerer is going to know 5 more spells than even Clockwork and Aberrant, and going to make it even clearer that there is no reason to play any of the older sorcerer subclasses. Well, let's take a look at these spells. And my initial reaction is twofold. Firstly, there are some pretty decent things on here. Secondly, it's not nearly as good a list as either Clockwork or Aberrants. There's nothing as good as what Clockwork got. Since those subclasses allowed you to trade out some of your spells for other spells, you could come up with an incredibly good list of spells that you know. These spells you can't trade out, so this is as good as it gets. Now I have 0 problems with that. I didn't really like the trading out. Yes, mechanically it made those sorcerers much better, but getting 10 spells made them good enough, and keeping the ones they were given helped more on theme. Yes, these aren't all the greatest spells in the world, but there's 15 of them. I particularly like the first level ones. Sanctuary isn't bad, but Faerie Fire is very good. And it's very good for the sorcerer because the sorcerer is at its best a controller. And at first level, it has the best first level control spell in the game, which is Sleep. But Sleep doesn't stay good, and it has a lot of restrictions. Faerie Fire gives the Lunar Sorcerer another choice with its control. I might even like Dissonant Whispers better on these lists. Dissonant Whispers is a reasonably strong first level damage spell with a control add-on. As a first level single target spell, it's ripe for twinning. After that, here and there's some nice things. There's uses for darkness. Phantom Steed is very nice when you need to get someplace very quickly. Evard's Black Tentacles is a decent control spell. A lot of these, Hallucinatory Terrain, Mislead, Dream, Freedom of Movement, are very situational, but they're just getting tacked onto your list, so situational is okay. The weird standout here is Mass Cure Wounds. If I was going to give a single healing spell to a subclass, that's not the one I would pick. I mean, it's pretty good for what it does, which is to get a lot of your allies up if they all went down simultaneously, but it's a strange one even with no other healing spells around it. Is it good to have? Yes, but if that's the only healing spell you've got, then there's another healer in the party who probably has that. On the other hand, if your party doesn't have a lot of healing, then perhaps this might be a real boon. As I said, these aren't great spells, but I like the situational nature. Now the theme issue rears its head, which is these really don't feel all that moon-like as a whole. I suppose Faerie Fire and certainly Moonbeam, trying hard to figure exactly how Dissonant Whispers, which is really a sound-based spell, is moon-like. There's some enchantment stuff, some illusion stuff, but it doesn't all fit completely into a nice, coherent whole. Overall, I think the problem with that is that there simply aren't enough spells moon-related, and they probably should have written some more. Tossing that aside, this is good. And we've got some more rules here. Whenever you finish a long rest, you can choose what lunar phase manifests its power through your magic: full moon, new moon, or crescent moon. While in the chosen phase, spells of the associated phase in the lunar spells table can be cast once without expending a spell slot. Once you cast a spell in this way, you can't do it again until you finish a long rest. And ooh boy, that's nice. So each day you get to change what phase of the moon you're in, and during that day, you get one extra casting of each one of 5 spells. Now, of course, we're talking at 9th level. At 1st level, you get 1 extra casting of 1 spell. And you know, 1 extra casting of 1 spell, if it's Faerie Fire or Dissonant Whispers or Sanctuary at 1st level, is pretty darn good. So yes, I really like this. And I like that it is significantly different from Aberrant Mind and Clockwork Soul. Makes me think that Wizards is going to play around with what they do with the Sorcerer class in the future. Now, I've just stated what the Lunar Embodiment feature is and how it works, as if that was clear, and it's not. Boy, is there disagreement already. A little bit of clarity coming out of Wizards of the Coast would be helpful. I mentioned that you learn 15 new spells. Why? Because that's what it says. You learn additional spells when you reach certain levels, and then it lists them. But a lot of people don't take that as what that means. Instead, they're looking ahead to when you choose your phase, and they're taking this to mean that you actually only learn 5 new spells, that you only get the ones that are in your moon phase. And so if tomorrow you wake up and choose a different moon phase, you forget the 5 you learned yesterday and you learn 5 new ones. I don't think that's what this says, because it starts by saying you learn these spells, and then it adds on the bit about being able to cast some of these once a day without a spell slot. That seems a separate item for me, but it is causing some confusion. And I've seen even greater confusion in that some people are saying from the wording, which is once you cast a spell in this way, you can't do it again until you finish a long rest. They're claiming this means that you don't get 5 extra castings of spells, 1 for each of those 5, but rather it means that you can choose 1 of the 5 spells under a moon cycle, and that 1 you can cast without using a spell slot, but only 1. It would be peculiar to have players choose whether they want to cast a 1st level spell or a 5th level spell in a day, but not both. They've used wording like this before, and I find it very improbable that that's the intention. So I'm taking this to mean that the Lunar Magic Sorcerer gets 15 more known spells than the base Sorcerer, and then gets to choose a moon cycle for which he can cast those 5 spells once per day without using a spell slot. I suspect once this enters the Dragonlance book, instead of being an Unearthed Arcana, we'll have changed wording on that. Now, I did want to bring up one more oddity of this list, and that's Death Ward. Death Ward is sitting there on the full moon spells list as what you get at 5th level, but 5th level would normally be a 3rd level spell, and Death Ward is a 4th level spell. Now, since it's giving you a free casting of the spell, this is workable, and it could be exactly what they meant. But it would mean that you're getting a spell on your spell list that you can't cast with your spell slots yet. And if I had to guess, I'd say that that spell will be changed by the time the final version of this comes out. Now, as I've said multiple times with the Aberrant and Clockwork, really we're done at this point. With those 15 added spells, plus 5 extra castings to go with them, this subclass is already one of the best. It's up there with Clockwork and Aberrant, way above the others, but we do have other features. So let's take a look. We get 2 of them at 6th level. One is Lunar Boons. This This one affects our meta magic depending on which moon cycle we're in. It lets us reduce the cost by 1 of meta magics that we use on either the spells that are in the cycle of the moon that we've currently chosen, or from 2 schools of magic that go with those moons. Abjuration and Conjuration for full moon, Evocation and Necromancy for new moon, Divination and Transmutation for crescent moon. And at first glance, this looks absolutely fantastic. At second glance, it's okay. I like it. I like all the twists and turns this ends up with. I also note that Enchantment and Illusion are missing here, which would have been the ones I would have most liked to see. The big thing affecting this feature, which will make this not be a big deal in the building of your character or even in the choosing of your spells, is that the number of times you can use this to reduce the cost is equal to your proficiency bonus. So for most of the time that people are playing the game, that's twice or 3 times, eventually 4 times. So this isn't a big changing the costs of your meta magic thing. This is equivalent to getting 2 or 3 or 4 more sorcery points in a day, which is nice, except it's far weaker than getting 2, 3, or 4 more sorcery points because the ways that you can use them are really restrained. You won't be able to use them on what you like the way you normally could with a sorcery point, but only in very specific circumstances, which is going to have anyone playing this subclass constantly looking up their sorcery list to see, okay, which spell, what school is that in? Can I do this with that? Oh, no, I can't. That said, it's a good feature. And I like it just for the fact that Dissonant Whispers is probably going to be my go-to for twinning, and with this, I can now twin it 2, 3, 4 times a day for free. That's not bad. So a nice feature, but don't get too excited. Strangely, the 6th level feature, which is really the big one, is getting less talk, at least for today, but then this Unearthed Arcana has only been out for a day, so maybe people will start talking about it more tomorrow, and that's Waxing and Waning. This allows you to shift which moon cycle you're in, not just after a long rest, but as a bonus action by spending a sorcery point. Okay, that can be kinda handy for your decreasing costs from your lunar boons, but really why it's important is if we go back up to Lunar Embodiment and look at the wording under the spells. While in the chosen phase, spells of the associated phase in the lunar spells table can be cast once without expending a spell slot. Once you cast a spell in this way, you can't do so again until you finish a long rest. Doesn't say you can't do it to other spells that suddenly become available to you. What this is letting you do is get 5 free castings of full moon spells when you wake up in the morning, and then as a bonus action, you switch over to new moon spells where you get 5 free castings of those spells. And then you pay 1 sorcery point to switch over to crescent moon spells to get 5 free castings of those spells. Waxing and Waning is adding 10 castings per day. Even with very situational spells, that's worth the sorcery point. Our next feature comes on at 14th level, where what we get depends on what our phase of the moon is. If we're full moon, you shed bright light in a 10-foot radius and dim light an additional 10 foot. In addition, you and creatures of your choice have advantage on saving throws while within the bright light you shed. Well, I can't say I'm excited about shedding bright light all the time, kind of annoying if you're sneaking around, but advantage on saving throws while within the light, that's big. That's why you take paladins kind of big. You have an aura. Alright, let me pull that in a little bit. You're a sorcerer. You're fragile. And there's nothing about this subclass which is making you less fragile. So you're not going to be up there in the front lines with your melee combatants. You're going to be in the back, so there's probably not going to be that many of your friends within 10 feet of you. Still, somebody's going to want to be within 10 feet of you if they can be, and this is a really good feature if it only affects you. At 14th level, if you're choosing full moon, you have permanent advantage on saving throws. That's good enough that I don't believe that this is going to end up that way. I think they're going to end up putting a time limit on it and making it maybe proficiency times per day, but it is 14th level, so who knows? Your second option was if you're in new moon form, and then you have advantage on stealth checks, and attack rolls have disadvantage against you in dim light or darkness. That's not bad. It's nowhere near as good as having advantage on saving throws, but it's good. And finally, you have Crescent Moon, which gives you resistance to necrotic and radiant damage, which is fine. It's certainly the weakest of the three, which probably works out because the Crescent Moon spell list was also the weakest of the three. But situationally, this could be very good if you think you're going to run into things doing a lot of necrotic damage. You're not going to run into things doing radiant damage often enough that you're going to care about having a feature for it. The new moon feature here is really good, and the full moon one is outstanding. And I hope this makes it in relatively unchanged into the final version. And finally, at 18th, we get our capstone. Once again, the effect depends on your phase of the moon, and you can activate these by either a bonus action or as part of the bonus action you spent to change to this particular phase of the moon using waxing and waning. The first two are 30-foot area effects around you. Full moon goes the light way. You radiate intense moonlight for a moment. Each creature of your choice, so no friendly fire, must succeed on a con saving throw or be blinded until the end of its next turn. And you also get to give another creature 3d8 hit points. This is okay. I mean, sure, you'd like to do this. It's much weaker than our 6th or 14th level features. You get to blind a few creatures for a short time. It's alright. I find the Constitution save strange. I would have thought a dex save to see if they cover their eyes from the bright light, but I guess they're going with the idea if your eyes are strong enough. So if the full moon went the light way, then new moon goes the dark way, and instead you send out gloom everywhere. Creatures within 30 feet of you that you choose, once again no friendly fire, have to save or take 3d10 necrotic damage and have their speed reduced to 0. Additionally, you get to turn invisible until the end of your next turn. This is a little better. I'm not excited by the 3d10 damage, but reducing a bunch of creatures' speed to 0 is pretty good for control, and it's nice to have another way to get invisible if you don't already have one. And finally, Crescent Moon. You slip through light and darkness. You can magically teleport to an unoccupied space within 60 feet, and when you do so, you gain resistance to all damage until the start of your next turn. By this level, I'd expect a sorcerer to have some teleport spells under its wing, but it's never bad to have another teleport, and this one looks like an emergency way out. If you're getting beaten up really badly, you get to jump away and make sure that nobody actually kills you this round. Well, it's resistance, so they still might, but this will help a lot. This is my clear favorite of the three. They are, however, a pretty unclimactic climax to a subclass. You can repeat using one of these three by spending 5 sorcery points. Yeah, you're never gonna do that. Somehow I think that the capstone should be equivalent to a mediocre spell. 3d10 damage, 3d8 healing. These are not numbers that should be popping up at 18th level. But I don't think it's a problem that the capstone isn't very good. Having a weaker capstone doesn't mean that this subclass isn't really good. With the big guns being the first level features, waxing and waning letting you change your moon phase, and that always on aura buffing your saves. Do I think they should do anything different for this? Because this is an Unearthed Arcana, and there probably will be changes made. I would take a closer look at those spells, see if I can get them a little bit more thematically the same, focus more for the full moon spells on either light or cures, so I'd probably kick freedom of movement out of there. For the new moon, look a little bit more at darkness and necrotic things, although as I see Dissonant Whispers not completely fitting, I really want Dissonant Whispers to stay on there. With Crescent Moon, I might be thinking in terms of illusions. Sanctuary is a nice spell, but I have a hard time grouping it together with blindness, deafness, and hallucinatory terrain, much less dream. But if they kept them as they are, I wouldn't argue. I would also like them to adjust the wording a bit for lunar embodiment to make it clearer. And if it were up to me, I would buff up the 18th level features a bit, but it's not necessary, and I'm not going to complain if they don't. And that's the Lunar Sorcerer. Between Tasha's and this, the Sorcerer class is a whole new thing. So what do you think? Do you like the Kender? Do you like the Lunar Magic Sorcerer? Is there anything you'd change, or are you just happy that we're getting some decent sorcerers? I'll be back as quick as I can to talk about the backgrounds and the feats. That's it for now. I've got my absinthe poured. Hope you do too.